India is a fantastically dynamic country with a huge potential. The relationship between the kingdom and India in the last 5 years especially has grown exponentially. That the relationship with India is a top priority. The very strong relationship between Prime Minister Modi and the Crown Prince, they both are very result-oriented. That they don't want just nice talk. They want to see actual results. They want to see progress. And
so welcome to Raisina Ideas Pod and to the second day of the Raisina Dialogue. We are joined by a very special guest, Prince Faisal. Prince Faisal, welcome to the Ideas Pod.
Thank you very much.
We are particularly going to speak to Prince Faisal on the big transformations underway in Saudi Arabia, one of the fastest growing economies in the G20 countries. I think Saudi Arabia is probably the outstanding performer in 2022 and very promising in terms of what's ahead. And we're going to try and discuss some of that with you. The big vision of MBS, the Crown Prince, on the future of the kingdom, on the future of the trajectory of the economy, and the big social transformations, the cultural transformations that are underway. So Prince Faisal, what is happening in Saudi Arabia? What are the big changes? What is the big vision of the Crown Prince? In India, we normally read about your country through Western media. Now we have you here, and we want to hear from you. What's the story of Saudi Arabia? How's it unfolding?
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I really appreciate it. It's fantastic to be here in India and at the Raisina Dialogue and to engage on this important stage. You asked me a question which I could take hours in answering, really, because there's so much going on in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The vision that Crown Prince launched 7 years ago, Vision 2030, was all about holistic transformation of the kingdom in all aspects, economic, social, etc., in a way that builds a pathway to sustainable prosperity for the Saudi people within the context of a changing world. So it really addresses all of the challenges that the kingdom faces economically and otherwise in a way, in a very measured way, in a very engaged way, based mainly on understanding where we are and where we need to go. So data is the key part of the kingdom's vision, driven by the Crown Prince. And one of the things that he insists on, and is very interesting, is that we work in a holistic way. Whenever we approach a problem, that we understand it from all angles, and that then all parts of the government work to achieve that. In a way, as I said, to build towards this sustainable prosperity for the Saudi people. And we're already seeing results. We are seeing results in the broad line. The fastest growing economy in the G20 last year, first time $1 trillion GDP, on track to continue similar levels of growth for the next 3 to 5 years at least. Probably by 2030, our projections, 10th largest economy in the world. That doesn't happen without real effort. And as I said, we try to work on every part of the economy, understanding where are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and maximizing those and addressing the challenges. And an example of that is diversification of the economy away from a dependence on oil. So we are breaching all of the targets that we had set for 2030. We've already achieved most of them in that regard. So we are working very hard on multiple fronts, and that includes addressing where we stand in the world, and how we integrate with the global economy in a way that is much more effective, and including the issue of climate change. So the kingdom has been known as an energy powerhouse, and that has been built on its hydrocarbon resources. But we continue to invest in that, while we invest as well in being part of the renewable future. And the kingdom has a huge potential in renewables, and we're working on green hydrogen, etc. So we will continue to be an energy powerhouse well into the carbon neutral future. Another issue, for instance, has been women's empowerment. So we have now women's participation in the labor force is up to 30%. We are working towards full employment for women, and that has been very important in addressing the issue of unemployment. So we have the lowest unemployment rate that we've ever had, at about 9.5%. And again, breaching targets very effectively.
No, the last point that you made, that's particularly fascinating. Something that you don't normally read in the news reports that come out of the traditional news media. the social transformations, women in workforce, larger freedoms available to many people, more progressive modern thinking. How are the youth and how is the society responding to the Crown Prince's very transformational project? I mean, there could be some disruptions as well. So how is the larger community, the conservatives and the youth, how are they responding to these stimulus?
I think that's the most interesting part of it. The level of energy that you can sense if you come to the kingdom is infectious. And that's driven by the excitement of the Saudi people, about what Vision 2030 is offering. You can see it everywhere you go, in Riyadh, in Jeddah, in all of the cities and towns of the kingdom. Everybody is energized by what this vision offers, the opportunities it opens up, but also the space that it opens up for people to really enjoy themselves. As we work towards diversifying the economy, one of the things that we have to do, of course, is open up new sectors. And some of those new sectors are entertainment, are sports, so really bringing joy into the public space and making that an effective avenue for people to engage with their community. So you can sense from that, and that has opened, of course, then the opportunity for Saudi entrepreneurs to become active. So if you come now to Riyadh, you will see young Saudis opening restaurants. You will see young Saudis opening all kinds of businesses to cater to not the Saudi population, but also the tourists. All of that is creating a certain dynamism. You have all of these now events that are happening in the kingdom, global sports events and global entertainment events, and all of that creates jobs, but it also creates a certain excitement. And of course, Vision 2030, as I said, is all about change, including changing the business environment. So the government has worked very hard to make the business environment more conducive to entrepreneurship, to engagement. All of that creates a very, very strong excitement among the Saudi people, and I hope also among the international community and the increasing number of expatriates that are coming to the kingdom.
I'm going to come back to that in a bit, but let me now turn to India and Saudi Arabia. Many would argue that it's been a sea change in our bilateral relationship in the last decade, certainly, but certainly in the last 5 to 6 years. We seem to be far more confident of each other, far more comfortable with each other, and far more sure and certain of each other. There's a degree of certainty in the relationship. What has changed? And how does Saudi Arabia visualize its emerging relationship, growing relationship, stronger relationship with India to be for it?
I would certainly agree. I would say that the relationship between the kingdom and India in the last 5 years especially has grown exponentially. Part of that is the very strong relationship between Prime Minister Modi and the Crown Prince, who have a very, very strong working relationship. Both of them are very similar in a sense that they both are very result-oriented. That they don't want just nice talk. They want to see actual results. They want to see progress, and that means that we in the government have very clear direction. Certainly, I do from the Crown Prince that we need to work on this relationship. That the relationship with India is a top priority, and that we need to have measurable progress in all sectors, especially the economic and trade relationship. And there we've seen just last year, I think 50% increase in trade, if I'm not mistaken. So a huge growth. Obviously, India is a fantastically dynamic country with a huge potential. And we've seen that especially in the last 5 years. The trajectory for India is fantastic. The potential that India holds is almost unmeasurable. And that, coupled with the kingdom's equal dynamism, equal progress, and our positions in the world, we are of course linked historically, given the fact that India has played an important role in our developmental journey for many decades, given the large Indian diaspora in Saudi Arabia. So that connection has existed even before that, hundreds of years, given the relationship between, the trade relationship between the Arabian Peninsula and India. And we're now building on that. We're building on that connection, on that relationship, in a way that is not just benefiting both of us, it's really benefiting the international community. We have similar political outlooks. We believe both of our countries very strongly in the need for multilateralism, in the need for cooperation, in the need to avoid polarization, to avoid this politics
approach,
of not just bipolar, just this focus on narrow interests against the interests of the whole. So India has taken a very strong stance on that. The kingdom is also is taking a very important position on that. And given our leadership role in the Arab and Muslim world, and India's huge size, that all offers very much great potential. A huge amount of India's trade to Europe passes through the Red Sea, and there we have a relationship. So the potential, I think, given the strong alignment politically, but also economically, is very significant. We are, of course, India's most important energy partner, as that's the case for traditional energies, but we are also looking to continue that into the renewable era. We're working, both on renewable projects in India, but also on just how do we potentially even connect, for instance, our grid links, etc. So there's a lot that we can do together. And then, of course, the future is in technology, and India is a global leader in technology. The kingdom is investing hugely in building its own capacities there, research development, so building the relationship between our institutions. So the potential is endless, really.
Prince Faisal, there are two areas on international relations and our joint approaches there, which I think perhaps I may want to learn from you more about. The first, of course, is what is the potential of an India-Saudi Arabia partnership for Africa? Not only is Saudi Arabia going to be important for energy and investments, but I think it is going to be the bridge or the hub which could connect the African continent, which is again a very dynamic continent of the future, and South and East Asia. And is Saudi Arabia thinking of that role of actually creating a framework that will allow countries like India to work with Saudi Arabia, to work with the African continent? So that's one part, the future of our partnership in Africa. And the second part is how can India and Saudi Arabia, which now seem to be the adults in the room, who seem to be the more sane voices in a club that is very rhetorical, how can we work together on the international dynamics that exist today, smoothing the nerves when it comes to the conflict in Europe, pacifying aggression in East Asia? How can we work together in these two big areas? Conflict areas that the world seems to be entering in, the conflict phase the world seems to be entering into, and the new opportunities that a continent like Africa presents all of us.
So we are very, very bullish about Africa. We in the kingdom, we think that the potential in Africa is tremendous. And of course, we are, we have a traditionally very strong relationship with Africa. We already have very good connections to the African continent, and we are working on building those connections even further, both through trade routes and otherwise. And a partnership with India in that regard makes immense sense, because we can be the bridge for all of Asia really into Africa, and vice versa, because as Africa continues to grow economically, as it continues to build its capacity, it will not just be a consumer, it will also eventually be a producer, and that offers tremendous opportunities for trade in both directions. And we believe, and this links to your second part of the question a little bit, we believe in the kingdom very strongly that we need to help enable all of us in the developing world to work together to strengthen our capacities across the board. To less, a lot of countries talk about the supply chain and things like that, but we are the most vulnerable to those challenges in the developing world, because right now we don't have all of the capacities to resist crises in that area. But the more we build our own capacities, the more we diversify the supply chain into the developing world, and build those. First of all, that increases economic growth, that builds new consumption, etc. So that's beneficial, but it also insulates us from all of the challenges that the future holds, in this increasingly polarized world. And that leads into the second part of your question. I think it's incredibly important that we continue to have a voice of reason, that we continue to emphasize the importance of cooperation and dialogue rather than confrontation and competition. The kingdom is, as part of its leadership role in the Arab world and the Muslim world, continuing to raise the voice in that regard. We believe, again, as I said, first of all, we cannot allow the global agenda to be set by a minority of states. Everybody has to have a voice. Everybody has to have a stake. And countries like the kingdom, countries like India, that have the capacity because of their size and their economic heft to amplify the voices of others, have a responsibility to do so. And obviously, if we work together, that becomes even more effective. That becomes even more impactful. So we will continue to work with India to make sure that the interests of everybody are represented when we set the global agenda, and especially on the economic front. Again, there are challenges that are coming that we don't understand yet. For instance, what does AI mean? If we allow, for instance, the regulatory framework to be developed without the inputs of everyone, that will create huge disadvantages in the coming decades for the developing world. That could almost, if you listen to some of the scientists, that could be equal to the resource challenges that came out of colonization. So we have to be very careful that we make sure that everybody's voice is heard.
A very important point. Let me ask you my final question, which I think is something that we have been thinking about at the foundation, but also other institutions in India have been thinking about it. When America in the previous century began its journey as an influential country, eventually became a superpower, and for a brief moment was riding the unipolar moment as the sole superpower. There was something else that accompanied the rise of America. It was of the cultural industry, Bollywood, literature, universities, schools. You had a whole institutional framework that allowed America and American thought and American views and American reality to be made available to millions and billions around the world. As Asia rises, where are those institutions? Who's going to tell those stories? Who's going to make those movies? Who's going to share our lived experiences? And do you think, even as we obsess with investments in infrastructure and connectivity and industry and renewables, we also have to invest in the art of telling our stories?
I'm glad you asked that question. It's an incredibly important matter, and you're right. We have been historically, the globe has been dominated by not just America, but by an Anglo-Saxon cultural perspective. And that has been positive in some ways, but it's also marginalized some of the important voices. And now you see, as you said, with the rise of Asia, you see a lot of that changing. Already, India, Bollywood has already historically had a very strong footprint, and that's increasing. South Korea is also very active, China, etc. And you can see that even in the kingdom. When a Bollywood star comes to the kingdom, they are overwhelmed with fans and supporters. The same, we had a Korean K-pop band come into the kingdom a year or so ago, and the tickets were sold out 3 times over. 100,000 people attended the concert. So all of that means that there is a thirst in the kingdom, but also globally, for a diverse cultural perspective. And we are very cognizant of that, and that's why we are investing heavily also in telling our own story and making sure that we can tell it to the world. So the kingdom is as one of the key parts of Vision 2030 is activating the cultural space, is activating the access for our young creators to be able to really tell the stories of Saudi Arabia. And you've seen an exponential growth in the last 5 years of Saudi movies coming to the global scene, Saudi television productions, etc. But we are very interested into having this dialogue. That's why we are very keen when we've opened our entertainment industry and our entertainment sector to global conversations. And that's why we have K-pop, Indian bands, etc. Because we need to make sure that we have a real dialogue between all of our populations, so that all of the globe really has to have this dialogue, so that there is a more internationally driven cultural space that also then helps build towards a better understanding of each other on a human level, which can prevent also in the future conflict, which can prevent crisis. But the cultural space is incredibly important, and that's a huge opportunity as well. My understanding is that there are 2 Bollywood movies that are coming out this year that were filmed in Saudi Arabia, at least partially filmed in parts of Saudi Arabia. That, again, it's another linkage between Vision 2030 and the potential it offers, and India, and what we can do together.
Prince Faisal, thank you so much for joining us at the Raisina Dialogue, and of course at the Raisina Ideas Pod. I hope we will see many movies that our populations make in each other's countries. I hope there are many movies we make together, because the Asian story will be co-scripted by a number of very wise people. And I must congratulate the Saudi government for its bold decisions to open up, transform, and create a vision for the future. I'm sure it will benefit the whole of Asia and indeed the entire world. And thank you so much for joining us at the dialogue. And I hope to see you soon again.